Your sex life is terrible. You got into this relationship with this girl and everything was going good at first, but now it's months or years later and sex isn't as frequent or as good as it once was. This happens a lot, probably more often than not, if we are being honest with ourselves and looking at the sad fact that most relationships are just not successful. If we look at relationships beyond the first few years, only about 15% of them could be considered happy based on studies. But regardless of the data, you want to be in that top 15%. You want happiness and you want your woman to be happy, right? And you damn sure didn't get into a long-term relationship to go weeks or months without sex and intimacy. So let's talk about what might be going on. Sex and intimacy is a complex issue. So I'm not about to make the mistake that most YouTube content creators make and try to give you simple answers to a complex problem that won't really work. But what we can do today is give you some things to look at that might start you on the pathway of fixing your problem. And if you want more tools to get into what will work for your relationship, click the link to get into my school community for free. You can ask questions there and get some support and direction for solving the complex issues of your relationships, as well as removing any mental obstacles that you might have to doing better in life in general. Back to the sex thing. I got 4 things for you to look at. But before the 4 things, let me offer you the one solution that a lot of the mano space and black pill, red pill, or whatever pill guys will probably say in my comment section. And that is if the sex goes down in your relationship, just next her, bro. Just be like a super alpha and end the relationship. And then I could say something about abundance and spinning plates or whatever. And we could all high five each other because we're men. Okay. Most of us, of course, men that want to start families or men who want to keep their families together, men who aren't the 22-year-old guy anymore who goes to the bars and clubs, but a man who would rather chill in a relationship. But hell, we're men, right? So if a woman doesn't jump when we say jump, then just next her, bro. Something then about the juice not being worth the squeeze. And then I'll say something about the wall and how you could replace her with 3 other girls with twice as many problems as your girl you have now. Okay, so there. We've covered now all of the advice that's on the internet. Here's the thing. You can always next a girl and move on from a relationship. And a lot of times getting out of a bad relationship is the answer to the problem. But if that was what you wanted to do, then you wouldn't be this far into the video. Look, the fact that nobody wants to talk about is that if you want a long-term relationship to work, you 100% will have to deal with some crap. And if you want to be single, you're going to have to deal with different crap. It's really just a trade-off. It's up to you to decide what crap you want to deal with and what's worth it and what isn't. So let's assume that the thing you are in right now could be worth it if you just worked out the sexual issues. With that, let's dive into the 4 things that you need to look at for solving this problem and having amazing sex in your relationships. Number 1, first, let's consider her overall health and libido. It is no question that libido and sex drive is a sign of good health. If she seems to be asexual with no sex drive at all, regardless of stimulus, then that is a sign of bad health. Now, it is true that a healthy woman will have a lower sex drive in general than a healthy man if we look at a 30-day calendar. But it is also true that for a window of about 7 to 10 calendar days around ovulation, a woman can get as horny as a guy. And some women can get an insatiable appetite for sex that is hard for most men to keep up with during that time. So if she isn't experiencing that increased sex drive during her ovulation window, then the problem is either she is horny and she just doesn't want sex from you, or she just isn't horny, which means that there's an indication there of a health issue. So is she exercising? Is her diet terrible? Is she drinking a lot or using a lot of drugs or prescription medication that would kill her libido? Does she have a medical condition or is she menopausal? These are things to look at and consider. If this is the issue, then you need to have a healthy conversation about sex and health and work towards some solutions. If she's willing to have that conversation with you, then you are on the right track. The problem is, however, that most guys face, at least the ones that end up in consults with me, is that the woman he is with is using her health as an excuse to not want to have sex very often. And she doesn't really care to want to do anything about it or fix it. Health and libido is not the reason most women stop having sex, even though it is the reason they will often give. It can seem like the excuse of I have a headache or I don't feel good is more of a manipulation than anything else. So if you try that healthy conversation and she won't talk to you about it or do anything about it, and she gets angry and upset and uses emotional manipulation to avoid the topic, then you're in trouble. That means there are bigger problems to solve. And that brings us to number 2. So second thing to look at is, what is her mental and emotional framework around sex? What is her overall attitude and feelings about sex in general? The social conditioning around sex is horrible, and most of you watching this right now have terrible ideas around what it means to have a healthy sex life in a long-term relationship. Here's the right way, and I would argue the only way, to think about sex in a relationship. And anything less than what I'm about to say is probably wrong or incomplete or setting you both up for failure. And that is, sex is the highest physical and emotional exchange that you both share together. And that is something that you do for your partner, and something your partner does for you, and something you get from your partner. And without having this exchange with enough frequency and quality, a long-term relationship can't be happy. So let me say that again in a less gender neutral way, right? But because it does apply though to both men and women, and that sex is the highest physical and emotional exchange that you share with someone. And it's what you do for her. It's what she does for you, and it's what you seek out from her. And without this physical and emotional exchange with enough frequency and quality, a long-term relationship just can't be happy. No, most guys and gals approach this differently, and they look at sex as something like, oh, it's something I do when I want it and I feel like having it. And they don't think past that. It's all about them and not who they are with. It is very selfish how most people handle sex, both men and women. Now, most girls in relationships operate as if sex is something she gives to a guy to get non-sexual rewards in return. And most of you guys take part in that negotiation. This is where a power dynamic is taking place, and sex is used as a weapon or tool to gain power. This leads to guys trying to get more and more sex for less and less effort. Guys stop courting and doing the nice things and taking her out and spending the non-sexual time and energy only to try to roll over on top of her once or twice a week to get off. And the girl wants to get more and more of those non-sexual rewards, like stuff paid for, gifts, dinners, labors, chores, things done for her, etc., while giving out less sex. And this creates a power struggle that can be very unhealthy. This is a problem with the power dynamic. And most couples are in a quiet struggle for power, where sex is used as a weapon in that struggle rather than as a means to keep things together and happy. And of course, the world we live in now will shame men for taking power in that struggle, and they'll shame men for wanting sex in general. Guys, you can't have a good sex life if you are shamed for wanting sex. You aren't going to be good for your girl either if she is making you feel like a bad person for wanting to bang her. So there is the power dynamic and weaponizing sex that can happen. But there are other things that cause a poor mental framework regarding sex as well. So you have to ask yourself, what are her past sexual experiences, and how have those experiences framed her mindset around sex? How do her friends and her social circles approach the topic of sex and treat sex? How did she grow up? And does she have sexual trauma or bad experiences? Maybe too much variety of experiences, and now she's numb to whatever she does with you. If the sex has gone down and you aren't having quality sex frequently, there's a good chance that her mental framework around sex is broken. If you want to learn how to fix that, you need to, at the very least, be in my community on School. But more than likely, you're going to have to book a session or get into one of my courses or coaching groups, because changing yourself and your girl's mental framework around sex is not an easy process. Now, the mental framework and power dynamic around sex is critical, as well as her physical and emotional health. But these things won't matter if the next two things aren't in line. That is what I'm going to share with you in part 2. There are two things that you guys don't want to talk about. Okay. And these are the dark secrets behind sex in a relationship. So make sure you are subscribed so you can get notified when part 2 drops.